Hey guys, it's Chef Dave. So, for today's algebra lesson, we're going to talk about 0. 0 is a really unusual number because it is neither positive nor negative. Often we kind of think of it as a negative number because 0 usually means the absence of something. You know, I guess in our physical world. In the world of food, if I've got a handful of cherry tomatoes, they're beautiful. Take a look at these. There you go. Red and beautiful orangey gold. Okay, if I had a handful of tomatoes, we'd kind of think of that as a positive thing, as a good thing, okay? But in the case where maybe I don't have any tomatoes, it makes us sad, so we kind of think of it as a negative. But 0 is neither positive nor negative, and it's really easy to understand using these cherry tomatoes. So, you ready? All right, let's go. Okay, so this is actually pretty easy. If 0 is added to any number, the answer is that number, okay? So let's say I have 4 cherry tomatoes. And let's say I add 0 cherry tomatoes. Boom. Okay, well, how many do I have now? Well, we know we have 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 0. Pretty easy. 4 plus 0 equals 0, right? Not too hard. But what if we have a variable? What if we don't know how many tomatoes is in here? Does it matter? If we add 0 to a variable, it is still that variable, right? Because we didn't add anything to it. It doesn't matter that we don't know what that number x represents. Remember that x's and variables represent kind of a mystery number? Yeah, we don't know what's in here, but we definitely know we didn't add anything to it. We added 0 to it. And so it remains that variable. All right. So now what happens if we subtract? Well, if 0 is subtracted from any number or variable, then the answer is still that number or variable. Okay? So let's say we have 4 cherry tomatoes. Put it right here. 4. And we're going to subtract 0. My handwriting's not that great, guys. Sorry. All right. 4 minus 0. How many do we have? Well, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 tomatoes. And we subtracted 0. So if I subtracted 1, it'd be like this, right? But I subtracted 0. So what do I have left? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the same thing. And if we have a variable, if we don't know how many are in there, and we subtract 0, it is still that variable. Super duper easy, right? Good. Well, what if we go the other way? What if a number or a variable is subtracted from 0? Well, when that happens, the answer is the opposite of that number or variable. So let's say we have 0 cherry tomatoes, okay? And we are subtracting 3. Well, right here, we can kind of consider this a positive 3, okay? Because let's just say I had 3 cherry tomatoes in here, and I subtracted 3 positives, right? That's 1, that's 2, and that's 3. Okay, well right now I don't even have that. I have 0 tomatoes and I'm subtracting 3 positive. Okay, well by the law, if a number or variable is subtracted from 0, so in this case we're subtracting a positive 3 from 0, the answer is the opposite of that number or variable. So if this is a positive 3, then the answer is negative 3. Okay, I have negative 3 cherry tomatoes in there. What happens if it is a variable? Well, okay, so I have 0. And let's say I want to subtract x. In this case, it's like a positive x, right? Because we don't really know what's in there. So that means that the answer is going to be the negative, or the opposite of what that is. So if that's technically a positive x, it's going to be a negative x. Okay? Pretty simple. So what happens if I want to do multiplication? Well, if we have any number or variable and we multiply it by 0, the answer must always be 0. Why? Well, let's go over that. Here I've got some yellow cherry tomatoes, okay? And let's say I have 3. But let's say I want to multiply that times 0, okay? Well, what it's saying is like I have 3 cherry tomatoes 0 number of times. Well, this would be 1 time because you can see it. There are 3 cherry tomatoes. But if I multiplied this times 0, in other words, 3 cherry tomatoes 0 times, well then I have nothing. I got 0. Okay? So it's really simple. I mean, that really just means 0. Any number times 0 equals 0. If I had a variable, let's say I had z. Okay? I didn't even know what was in there, but I multiplied it times 0. It's still 0 because we just don't know. That is the rule. And even if it was flipped around, if we had 0 times, let's say 7, well, it would still be 0. Okay? You can write that differently. Remember, we already talked about how you can write equations differently. So let's say 0 times x. We're going to use a variable. We don't even know what the number is. It's still 0. It works the same way. It doesn't matter if these are flipped around or not. Okay? Okay. Finally, it works the same way for division as it does for multiplication. So if I have 0 and I want to divide it by 4, like the tomatoes I had, well, that's still 0. Okay? Because you can't divide into 0. If we had a fraction, let's say we had a fraction and we had 0. Boy, my handwriting is terrible. And it's over z. Okay? That means we're taking 0 divided by z. Another way to write that would be, 0 divided by z. Well, it's the same thing. You can't divide into 0, so it becomes 0. Make sense? Oop. How's that? There you go. Multiplication and division are the same way. Okay, finally. If any number or variable is divided by 0, the result is undefined. Did you hear that? It's not 0. It's actually undefined because you cannot divide by 0. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's say I have my cherry tomatoes, my 3 cherry tomatoes. Okay? So I have 3 divided by 0, right? Well, you can't divide by 0 because when you're multiplying or dividing, you're basically saying that many times, right? So in the case of like an equation where I have, let's just say I had something like, here, let me move this over. Let's say I have an equation where I have something like 3 times 2. What does that mean? Well, I've got one set of 3 tomatoes, and I've got 2 sets now of cherry tomatoes, right? And each one has 3. Okay, so I have 3 groups of tomatoes in a cup times 2. Well, then I know I have a total of 6, right? Because I'm multiplying a group of 3 times 2. Okay, that makes sense. That's something you can actually do. You could divide it the same way. If I had 6, let's say I had 6 tomatoes divided by 3 sets of 3. Okay, it'd be 2. But you can't do that with 0. You just cannot divide by 0, so that remains undefined. That's a question mark with Chef Dave's bad handwriting. There you go. Okay? And of course you could write that differently too. You could write that like, let's use the variable a over 0, which just means a divided by 0. Well, it really just means undefined. You cannot divide by 0. And that's the distinction. Everybody understand? Awesome. Now, what are we going to do with these tomatoes? Got to do something with them, right? We can play with our food, but we never waste it. So, how about a recipe? Awesome. Here we go. Hey guys, it's Dave. So, we're going to get started with this series. We're going to learn a bunch of cool things, but I have you watching this video first because there are some very important things we need to cover when working in the kitchen. Okay? Kitchens are not playgrounds. They are fun places to learn things, to make things, delicious things, but they're not playgrounds. I operate with 3 very important rules in the kitchen. So, rule number 1 is safety first. Okay? That means we have to be very mindful of what we're doing, what we're working with. These are very sharp things, right? We like them, they help us, but they're not toys. This part right here is particularly dangerous if we don't operate with respect and handle this utensil or this knife properly, right? Doesn't have to be a knife. Here's a utensil. This is called a microplaner. And this thing has got a bunch of tiny little sharp edges that can really hurt us if we're not careful with what we're doing. Safety first. Also, do we run around with knives anywhere in the world? No, but we certainly don't do that in the kitchen. So I'm not going to be running around going like this, right? Carrying it wrong. We don't run around in the kitchen. Safety first. All right, rule number 2 is wash your hands. So it's very important to wash your hands before working with anything, because you could be outside, you could be working on, your tablet if you're doing your homework, and then you come into the kitchen and you want to do one of my recipes. Well, you might have grimy little hands. We're going to want to wash them first, right? That makes sense. You would wash some of your produce before working with it anyway. So same thing goes for your hands. Wash your hands.
And this is the part where I forget to tell you that rule number 3 is keep it clean.
All right, guys, so we are ready to make bruschetta with our tomatoes. So I've already done the garlic bread. You can follow along in the recipe to do your garlic bread. I'm using a French loaf that I sliced into 1/2-inch slices, kind of did them up the way the recipe says. I'm going to move on from that so I can show you how to make the bruschetta, okay? I'm going to move those out to the side for a little bit. Now, notice, safety first, right? My knife is off to the side with the blade facing out, away from me. I'm not going to cross over with my hands and nick myself. My microplane is actually on the board, but on the far side, so it's exactly where I can see it. My hands are nice and washed, and everything is neatly arranged, keeping it clean. My 3 rules for the kitchen are met. We can begin. So, what I have is a standard, just a regular old bamboo cutting board. I've got a little bowl that I'm going to transfer everything into as I cut it, okay? But I'm going to move that off to the side for now because I need to cut my tomatoes. And I've got beautiful red and gold cherry tomatoes. I've got about a cup's worth of those, and I need to dice them. So, now, if you've got little hands, you might want to use a small knife like a paring knife just like this, okay? Like my 3.5-inch paring knife. And all you're going to do, kind of a version of the claw, instead of holding a tiny little baby tomato down like this, we're just going to kind of hold it with our thumb and forefinger and slice through once, turn it, and then again so that we make 4 equal pieces. And we're going to move it off to the side. If you can handle a larger knife, if you've got larger hands, or you just feel more comfortable with an 8-inch chef's knife, hey, go for it, Just be very careful. Don't forget to use or to hold the knife properly. Here's your bolster, thumb and forefinger. Next 3 fingers, right there. Use your wrist, okay, to cut through. So we simply hold the tomato down, slice, and slice. Yes, some of your seeds are going to pop out. No worries, no big deal. And just keep doing that till you get through all of your cherry tomatoes. We're only working with a cup, so it's not a lot to have to do. And just keep rocking it. Just keep going. Okay, so I'm down to my last 2. I went back to my paring knife because it was just much easier to handle. Don't forget, at any time when we have work like this to do for any of our recipes, if you need to pause it, I'll tell you where to pause it so that you can kind of catch up, and then we can continue on to the next step, okay? But here are my beautiful cherry tomatoes cut up, and I'm going to put them into my bowl. So I can take the back of my knife, hold it this way, and just kind of scrape them into my bowl. Okay, real easy. I'm going to move the bowl off to the side because the next thing to do is to cut the olives the very same way. So, once, now I got big olives, so I may cut it into 6 pieces, but it's up to you. I also should point out that I'm actually using garlic stuffed olives. I just love garlic. And here I am at the very end. Beautiful. So I call for a 1/4 cup of these. For me, with these large olives, that was about 8 of them. And I have measuring, cups that are basically the right size volume that I need. So it makes it much easier to measure out. Okay, so here we go. Put that all together. Transfer into my bowl. Here are my tomatoes. Beautiful olives and tomatoes. And now we can move on to the next ingredient. Okay, so I wiped my board after the olives, and I decided to take the large knife off the board completely, actually off my counter space completely, because I just don't need it. Okay, so I moved my microplane off to the side. I'm going to be working with my paring knife for the rest of this recipe, and the next thing to do is take garlic. So I have a few loose cloves, and a couple of them are still part of the bulb. I got this little one here, and it's full of paper. So one of the things you can do to make this easier for you, you don't even need the knife. A lot of cooking shows will say, take your knife, turn it on its side, and slam it. Well, that's still kind of dangerous, isn't it? So all you have to do is take your clove, put it on the cutting board, put your hands over, and put your weight into it. And you can crack it. That's the paper actually, breaking and tearing off. You can just pull that paper off now, and you're left with just the part you need. We'll just get that paper off the board. And so now I can take my clove, and with my paring knife, I can kind of slice it. Using my claw with the other hand. Okay? And just keep going. Now, there are a couple of things you can do to make work a little easier. If we were using the big knife, it'd be really easy to just kind of mince it. Since we're using a small one, for some of you with little hands, just kind of slice through like this. Okay? But there is something you can do to kind of help you. And that is to take some of the salt. So you can see in the recipe, it calls for just a pinch of sea salt. Well, take a pinch and put it right on top of your garlic like this. And then with the side of your knife, scrape. Just scrape, scrape, scrape. What happens here is the salt kind of acts like little tiny teeth, kind of like a saw, and it grinds up your garlic, grinds up your garlic, grinds up your garlic. Okay? Pretty easy. Pretty easy. And I'm just scraping it till it's mashed up. This might take you, 20 seconds or so. Alright, so now I got my garlic, and I'm going to add that to my bowl. I'll take my big spoon and kind of gather it up and put it right into the bowl. Alright, so now it's time for the basil. So I've got about 7 leaves right here. I'm taking the stem off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these leaves flat on themselves. Okay? Just like this. Little ones get a little tricky. Just do your best. Okay? Then I'm going to roll them just like they were paper, right? Okay, now that I've rolled them, I can take my knife and I'm just gonna make slicing motions like this, cutting it very thin as I can. I'm still using the claw, notice, right here with this hand. And I take with the other knife, I just slice through, making little ribbons. In French cuisine, we call this chiffonade. Basically means little ribbons. And you often do this for leafy greens like this. And I'm just gonna keep going, making my ribbons. Okay? And then when I get done, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to open them up. Now, you don't need to rush this. Okay? Safety first. You take as much time as you need. It's more important to keep them together and be safe and make good cuts. And I'll take the bottom part off, which is kind of stemmy. And then I can open these up. Ooh, look at that. Isn't that cool? Beautiful little ribbons of basil. I'm going to move that off to the side because now I'm going to take my parsley, and I'm just going to take a bunch because I'm asking you to use about 3 tablespoons or so. Okay? Don't use the stems. We don't want the stems. And just give it a couple of chops, just like this. The same way you did the basil, you can kind of hold the parsley together, and with your other hand with the knife, just slice through. Okay? Be very careful. And then kind of bunch it up, kind of do it again. And that should be enough, actually. Okay? This actually looks like I've got way more than I need, so I'm going to take about 1 tablespoon, 2, and 3. I'm going to leave the rest. This stuff right here goes into my bowl. Here's my bowl. You can just grab it and put it right in there. Okay, so I've got half a lemon here, okay, because the recipe actually calls for 2 tablespoons of lemon juice and a teaspoon of zest. So it's easier to get the zest first, and this is where we use the microplane. So all you have to do is take your lemon, okay, and with the zester, or your microplane rather, you're just going to scrape the outside of the lemon. Now look what I did there. My lights are kind of bright. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the shiny yellow part off, You don't want any of the white stuff underneath, which is called the pith. It's very bitter. It doesn't really taste good. You want the outer part, you know, what looks like the peel to you when you haven't peeled your lemon. That's called the zest, okay? And I need just a teaspoon of that for today's recipe because this is really powerful stuff. It's so full of flavor. It just smells amazing, okay? So I'm gonna take that and add it to my bowl. Tap, tap, tap. I'm gonna scrape a little bit of that out. There we go. Now that we've done that, now I just simply take my lemon. I'm just gonna slice a wedge off of it, okay? And I'm gonna make sure there are no seeds, okay? We don't want seeds in our bruschetta. And I'm just gonna squeeze, right? If you really wanna measure it out, you can take your spoon, you can kind of measure out, you know, 2 tablespoons. I have a large spoon that's probably about 2 tablespoons big. So I'm just gonna kind of do it by eyesight. Also, this one's one of those ingredients where it's like you use as much as it tastes as tastes good to you, okay? I like a lot of lemon. With that, I'm gonna take my sea salt, just a little bit more, because I already used some in my garlic. I'm gonna take a pinch of black pepper. Watch your nose. Okay. Now there are some great, you know, products out there. I'm sure some of you have seen that you can get like a pepper grinder, which has whole peppercorns in there, right? You can turn that over and just give it a couple. Really fresh flavor. It's wonderful. It's up to you. Okay. And I even like a little bit of the paprika that we use for the garlic bread. And that goes in there. Okay. And finally, I'm going to use olive oil. Okay, I asked for you to use about a 1/4 cup. And secret ingredient for today, which is not in the recipe card, every now and again I like to use just a little bit of red wine vinegar. So I'm going to take just about a teaspoon, just a little bit, a couple of drops, and add that in there. All I have to do now is mix it all together. Look at that beautiful color. Oh my goodness, look at that. Wow, reds and golds and greens. My goodness. It just smells amazing with that garlic. It smells amazing with that lemon in there, those fresh herbs, the tomato, the olives. So beautiful. Look at that. Now all we have to do is cover this with plastic wrap and put it in the fridge if we're not going to use it right away. But to be quite honest, I'm hungry. I'm ready to eat. Okay, so what I did next was I put my garlic bread on the plate. Okay. And I'm going to take spoonfuls of my bruschetta. I'm going to give it one quick toss just to make sure everything's combined. And carefully place a spoonful or a couple of spoonfuls on each piece of bread. I like lots of color, so I'm going to make sure I get plenty of orange and red tomatoes. Beautiful. There's going to be a little extra liquid in the plate, in the bowl. No worries, not a big deal. You can just kind of leave it there because you've already really well marinated everything else. Or rather, well dressed. We'll call this dressing. So, there you go. On there. Now you can do one of two things for the Parmesan cheese. You can use a large planer, which will give you nice large shavings. I'm going to continue to use my micro planer, and I'm simply going to grate some of that cheese with my planer right on top of my bruschetta. Okay, looks fantastic. Almost looks like snow. So beautiful and small, and delicate looking. Oh, big old piece of cheese. We'll just save that for Chef Dave for later. All right, beautiful. And there you have it. Give it a shake. All right, how's that? All right, everybody, so we learned a little bit about 0. Very unusual number, has very specific properties. I hope the tomatoes helped you understand a little bit better, you know, how we use that in math, how we use 0 in math, and I hope you really enjoyed the recipe. Keep practicing. You keep practicing, you'll master this. You master this, it becomes yours for life. You can do this anywhere you want, just like math, okay? So keep coming back, keep learning with me, and I'll see you next time here on Foodie Classroom. Bye, guys.